Hello everybody. So I want to extend my thanks to BRMI who've hosted this webinar today, and I want to thank you also for your attendance. It's a pleasure to speak to you about this. I just want to give you a brief introduction. My name is John Baxter. I've been a consultant, business relationship manager for over 13-14 years now, and I am the managing associate and founder of Baxter Thompson Associates. So come to you with a bit of experience today, and I've been working with a client specifically around the domain of information security, and basically how Baxter Thompson Associates helps InfoSec get better collaboration and engagement, and drives value as a consequence of that to the rest of the business. So without further ado, I'll go on to the next slide. I'd also like to introduce the company Baxter Thompson Associates. So we are a 360-degree full-service company specifically focusing on business relationship management, and we believe it's a fundamental role in business. It drives value, innovation, strategic alignment. It can reduce costs, risk profiles. So it has a huge value-adding potential, and we think a lot of businesses can benefit from it. The company itself has been going for 6 years and has been either operating in business functions or in the IT departments per se. We have a experience of interim management and consulting, and we want to be seen as an industry innovator. We believe we've got some very good insights into how we can operate as business relationship management, and we've encapsulated that all in Reconnaissance for IT, which is effectively a diagnostic and framework that we can apply to many different situations and contexts to drive the best value for that specific business. So this presentation is effectively an example of that, and we plan to deliver this diagnostic and change management to other like-minded businesses. We work for corporate companies effectively on a European basis, but we have demonstrated the utility of this service in smaller growing companies too. So today, hopefully we'll get all of the main body of the conversation out of the way in about 50 minutes. It's split into 3 components. There's a client view, there's a business relationship management view, and then there's questions at the end of the presentation. So there's a lot of information. I'll be going at this at a fast rate, so please reserve the questions at the end, and I'm happy to take questions offline or via email or via a separate phone call should you choose to. So what's next? Now there's key themes associated with business relationship management. There's effectively clarity of the role. There's the disciplines of the business relationship management competency, and then there's the business relationship management competencies themselves. And the whole aspect of this talk is going to be structured on 3 things. It's going to be clarity of the role, demand shaping, and servicing. So demand shaping is effectively understanding what the business imperatives are and structuring that into a portfolio of change requests, projects, initiatives, transformation programs, and servicing is obviously about delivering the ongoing operational support to the business. Now, the next element of our conversation is going to be on the client view. I'd also like to introduce the company Baxter Thompson Associates. So we are a 360-degree full-service company specifically focusing on business relationship management, and we believe it's a fundamental role in business. It drives value, innovation, strategic alignment. It can reduce costs, risk profiles. So it has a huge value-adding potential, and we think a lot of businesses can benefit from it. The company itself has been going for 6 years. and has been either operating in business functions or in the IT departments per se. We have a experience of interim management and consulting. And we want to be seen as an industry innovator. We believe we've got some very good insights into how we can operate as business relationship management, and we've encapsulated that all in Reconnaissance for IT, which is effectively a diagnostic and framework that we can apply to many different situations and contexts to drive the best value for that specific business. So this presentation is effectively an example of that, and we plan to deliver this diagnostic and change management to other like-minded businesses. We work for corporate companies effectively on a European basis, but we have demonstrated the utility of this service in smaller growing companies too. So today, hopefully, we'll get all of the main body of the conversation out of the way in about 50 minutes. It's split into three components. There's a client view, there's a business relationship management view, and then there's questions at the end of the presentation. So there's a lot of information. I'll be going at this at a fast rate, so please reserve the questions at the end, and I'm happy to take questions offline or via email or via a separate phone call should you choose to. So, what's next? Now, there's key themes associated with business relationship management. There's effectively clarity of the role. There's the disciplines of the business relationship management competency, and then there's the business relationship management competencies themselves. And the whole aspect of this talk is going to be structured on three things. It's going to be clarity of the role, demand shaping, and servicing. So demand shaping is effectively understanding what the business imperatives are and structuring that into a portfolio of change requests, projects, initiatives, transformation programs, and servicing is obviously about delivering the ongoing operational support to the business. Now, the next element of our conversation is going to be on the client view. So within the client view, we have three topics. First one is enable focus, then the second one is the engagement focus, and then the third one is the risk focus. So let's have a look at how we go from a protect focus to a protect and enable focus. The company in question is basically working in the financial services sector. They are an exchange, a technology company, and effectively over the past decade they had gone through a substantial amount of change. They started off in 2000 with the merger of 3 exchanges, and in 2002 2 more exchanges were added, and then there was a buyout, another buyout, and then initial public offering, and then a separation for the company. So you can imagine that over these period that a lot of the issues that had arisen comes out of the integration and divestment of different capabilities and technologies, and it was a lot of extremely complex work, and complicated even further by the fact that across Europe and indeed the States, we were working with different languages and different cultures. So for the client company, effectively what they provided in terms of services was listing of companies, so raising capital on the exchanges. They provide trading services to traders, and that meant cash and derivatives and stocks. The subsequent information generated from that, market data and indices, you see the FTSE trackers, that kind of thing on the little ribbon bars at the top of, on the news channels. They provided information like that. And then finally, obviously, with the trading elements, there's obviously a lot of settlement activities in the back office, which meant clearing and custody of financial transactions. Now, all of these different services could be packaged together as a white label and sold to banks, so that the banks could offer these platforms to traders. The diagram we have here is very much an abstracted organizational view of the company. You see that effectively that in like many businesses and many of the standard functions exist, but what is going to be interesting to us today is how information technology interacts with the rest of the business functions. So we have markets over here. We have solutions. These are the people who provide the white label service offerings. We have business design in terms of new products, and then obviously IT as well. And within IT, we've got technology hardware. We have information security, who is a significant component of IT, given the risk nature and the financial services industry within which this business operates. And then we have application developments and support. Now, looking at InfoSec, how does it engage with the rest of the business? Now, looking at the organizational context in a slightly different way, we're taking a hierarchical view now. So we've got heads of departments, and what does that mean? Well, it's the directors from markets and solutions. They're providing the strategic direction for the company. And effectively, they would be the sponsors or the people who would be providing the funding for different initiatives. At a lower level would be the key influencers, who would be the generators of new demand, the ideas, the solutions, and the bringing on board of the new clients. And they're effectively the product owners, the business development managers, and project managers. That's a lower level down, and taking into account the whole of the business this time, we have standard users, shall we say. And effectively, from an InfoSec perspective, engagement activities meant looking at controls, looking at risk, looking at best practices, communications, and training. So, although this type of company had a lot of senior managers involved, everybody was a desktop user, for example. So depending on the context, they would have different needs. So that went from password change requests through to a new projects initiative, so on and so forth. Another way of looking at the organizational context is to break down the InfoSec department into its individual capabilities. Now, when we were first engaged as Baxter Thompson Associates to help the client, we were wanting to look at specifically the training aspects, the communication aspects, and the management of security architecture. However, that is only a few pieces of the jigsaw, and InfoSec itself has quite a few other different capabilities. So it has IT asset management, so security control management, it has risk management, so data classification, and in addition, when we'd been working with the people within InfoSec, we also identified, well, look, they have some common capabilities that exist across the organization, such as demand management and project management as well. So, given the specialist nature of the organization, it still had needs for such more standard practices. Now, typically, a business, certainly working in the financial services sector and specifically working around sort of sensitive information as trades, has a very security conscious point of view. Now, this point of view classically comes around protecting the organization, and that means building the walls high, building the walls deep around that organization to protect it from outside attack. The key vehicle for doing that is actually by using technology. So that you can avoid the breach, you can avoid the embarrassing incidents and the publicity, and obviously the potential financial loss of the security breach. So, given the context and the security risk associated with the company, when it comes to actually making changes to that environment, it becomes very difficult simply because any flexibility actually starts to drive risk up. So the default message is no. Um, Basically, you can't have it because it's going to increase the risk, and therefore you'll be making a liability for the company. Now, that's all very well and good, but it does, on the one hand, prevent creativity and competitive advantage from flourishing within the company. So there's a question of striking the balance. Now, if from an information security perspective you're going to try and manage risk through policies and procedures, then you may well find that people could circumvent those policies and procedures. So here we have a Herman's iceberg model, and effectively on the top level you may well put those policies and controls in place, but below the iceberg, and that's actually the fundamental driver for getting things done within the company, those drivers will be beliefs and assumptions about the people and colleagues and peers you work with on how they work and deliver output, or not. You see, so inevitably they will find ways around um, these controls to try and get things done. So on the one hand, even though you put more controls in place, on the other hand, people will find ways around them, and that's driven through perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes. Now, these issues, I believe, are quite common, and I would argue that the industry awareness approach, the information security awareness approach, is based on three things. You have the risk element. For example, phishing or spam email or hacking attempts, and then there'll be a control action to put in place, and that's either through technology or procedure. And then finally, there's a communicate aspect to this where business users are informed and trained where necessary. So you'd hope that the overall risk profile is reduced, but what you also find is that there's antagonism that could be caused because of the extra burden through additional procedures and negative perception, and also avoidance of the procedure itself. So we're coming up on a problem statement now. On the one hand, we want to reduce the risk profile, but also we want to work with our colleagues at the same time. And that's really the question. How can we reduce risk, but also reduce the negative perception, the avoidance of controls and procedures? So on the left-hand side, we have some problems. The problems are antagonism, negative perception, and avoidance. So working with our client, we proposed some solutions. The first one was to improve the credibility of the organization, moving it away from the department says no, by defining what the strategic approach was going to be and putting in some basic program planning to demonstrate this is the direction the department is taking. The second aspect was really to improve the trust and the relationships and the communication skills by delivery of the principles of engagement and the deployment of additional processes. So that meant having a person who would take on board a new communications approach and also engage in a different way from the classic help desk scenario. Now then, in addition to that, because of the nature of the work, we want to look at the capacity of the security architect and the processes associated with that. So these were the three fundamental initiatives to attack each of these problems. Now, it wasn't a direct one-to-one relationship. It was the package together which would overall reduce the impact of these problems. So given that we've identified what the problem to solve is, the next step really is to understand the strategic intent of the InfoSec organization and what that means in practice. So uh, this page is effectively the strategy at a very high level. It's no more complicated than one more page, but really to articulate the point that InfoSec here is to enable and protect client company to efficiently execute its business strategy. So InfoSec is seen there to support and enable the company. What does that mean in practice? It means that rather than just being a 100% protect focus, build a highs wall and deep, but also to engage collaboratively with the business to ensure that they can have competitive advantage. This means that we'll be working with our partners, we'll be identifying security options, and we'll be informing risk-based decisions. So it's gone is the no attitude and more of how can we help attitude. And to make that happen, we have a few projects. We have the InfoSec engagement project, of which this whole presentation is a feature of. There's a new organization structure, which involves more change management. And then there's also the starting up of a technical risk management capability as well. Now, the principles here I will go into a little bit more detail later on, but overall this is the strategy that InfoSec would pursue for the next 2 to 3 years. So we've looked at the way in which, from the client perspective, how do we go from a protect focus to a protect and enable focus. Now we want to look at, well, how do we go from an awareness focus to engagement. So I called out those engagement principles on the strategy on the page a couple of slides ago, and there are 5. The principles are really to have one proactive team where security is the responsibility of all. So we're looking at the whole business organization. It's not just InfoSec fighting the security corner and trying to get everybody else to come on board, but it's basically sharing the responsibility. Another key principle is that we want to engage earlier in the decision-making process. We want to engage earlier in the ideas phase of where these initiatives come out of. We also want to say, look, instead of no, which sometimes may be one of the outcomes, but we want to provide options as well. We want to focus on the partner needs as well. And we want to define the solutions by risk, not just technology themselves. Examples of engagement principles then boil down to these 5 things. It means shared business and IT goals. It means showing an interest in how the business makes money. It means taking time to understand the business requirements. And it means having a focused attitude on the business partner. It means understanding the stresses and strains within trying to deliver something, and it means being helpful. Finally, moving the vocabulary away from technology, but talking in common language terms on benefits and risk means that both the InfoSec team and the business partner can make a joint decision. A decision is not being made on the behalf of somebody else or outside of somebody else, but it's jointly done together. The impact of all of this is that there's a change in culture required, and that may well require the help from the HR department to elicit the expected attitudes and behaviours required from staff, set those expectations, say in performance review sessions, and manage appropriately. It may mean that additional attributes in terms of skills profiles on job specifications need to be added, so that, say, when we're looking for help desk operatives, they come to the table with the right skills already. In terms of engagement approach, it's an integrated approach with the business. Now, typically in an organization which has an awareness program already in place, there is focus on updating policies and procedures to put in place controls. Training often occurs on the back of that. Materials are put together, presentations, so on and so forth, and then they're given out to the rest of the organisation. I'm not saying that we don't do these, but what I am saying is we actually put in place additional activities to make sure that the flow of information between the stakeholders is integrated and it's not just one way. So new activities means discussing with InfoSec liaisons and employees. Now, this actually turns out to be a core component of the engagement approach. So just like you'd have a super user, say, in a SAP implementation within a business, we are proposing here that we have liaisons within the business who would be the eyes and ears of the engagement manager within information security. So in addition, they would be the mouthpieces for the InfoSec organization. So we have now a focus channel for communication both backwards and forwards. They can also be the friendly face of InfoSec when it comes to enforcing policies. So it's not just saying no, but providing a rationale and positive enforcement of those messages. In addition, new activities, because we're engaged and closer to the action, so to speak, in a business sense, that we understand the opportunities and threats associated with that. So, say we can pick up quicker the phishing attacks that are coming from outside the organization, and we can provide some business context around that. We can also apply the InfoSec principles that we've been talking about earlier, engaging earlier, talking about risk, having a partner-focused approach. And as an outcome of those additional new activities, we can identify new controls and mitigating actions, but they are more nuanced. They're not a one-size-fits-all. You're able to provide an opportunity for the business still to do its work, but within a risk profile that's acceptable to information security. And on the outcome of that, we're having to update again the policies and procedures. So you can see this cyclical approach to this engagement approach. So what do those activities mean overall? So we have meetings with the head of departments on a regular basis, and that's normally conducted by the CISO. They inform the engagement manager, who manages the communication flow with the end users, and who also then puts together the training plan for the year for new starters in the organization. The InfoSec liaisons, the activities there, as I've already described, they're a key component of the engagement plan. Then in addition to that is the site visits. So there's budget available for people to go and say do one-to-ones with the InfoSec liaisons in the organization, have lunch and learns, have town hall meetings. So it's providing a face. It's getting out of the server room, so to speak. And as part of that, there's the policy enforcement. So rather than just diktat type emails, it's much more of a friendly face based on a relationship rather than stark emails. Obviously, there's a communications program based on intranet sites, based on policy documents, based on newsletters, so on and so forth. Now, in any type of program, it's good to have continuous improvement, and that can only really occur based on feedback. And the surveys we want to create are twofold. One is to understand the level of understanding about the policies and procedures and acceptance, and the second one is really to understand from the business perspective how InfoSec is performing, and that then drives the continuous improvement and then changes the approach and the content of a lot of these other activities here. have a roadmap, very simple, basically identifying the key milestones to get to the endpoint here. So we're monitoring and measuring the success of these individual activities so that they achieve the overall outcome. I want to alight at this point on the InfoSec roles, specifically on the engagement manager, and just call out really the key components. And as I've mentioned before, and I'll mention again here, they're responsible for managing the InfoSec liaisons. In terms of skills and behaviors, I've called out what's specifically required, and I'm talking here specifically about people focus, friendly, emphatic, and the communicator. Sorry. Now, in terms of target audience, I'm suggesting here that the engagement manager, they're focusing pretty much on the business users for most of the time, but also engage with the key influencers from time to time. So we've looked at the engagement approach, and now I want to discuss the risk focus. Risk. Now we need to strike a balance, basically, and the balance is going to be between more regulation, more legal requirements versus more creativity and competitive advantage. Now obviously we need to be able to drive new products and services into the market to create new revenue, but at the same time we don't want to put the business at such great risk that we go out of business through a security breach, so on and so forth. So where is the right balance? And because some of these aspects are quite fixed, we actually may need to move the fulcrum in terms of our risk profile to enable the business to remain competitive. So we can do that through risk management. We identify what the risk profile is acceptable to the business, and then through governance and business engagement, we apply those principles to the initiatives and operations so that we can transact in the environment we find ourselves in. So we've seen this abstracted organization chart of the client before, and really what I'm saying here now is that we applied the channels of demand into the IT function. So from markets, we have market requirements, we have regulatory requirements coming in, we have demand generated by key influencers and other operational requirements coming from organizations, and they all hit the IT department. So what? What does that mean? It means basically that from all of these different sources, it's hitting the IT departments all at the same time. They're all pretty much competing for the same resource. They're all top priority, and they're all at different stages of the life cycle. Sometimes the project's almost about to go live. Sometimes it's still an idea in some people's heads. The issue is specifically that the architects who have to deal with the solutions proposed is that they're swamped with work and they're unable to prioritize it. So in terms of prescribing a solution to this problem, we need to look at the engagement approach, the governance, the demand planning, project management and capacity planning of the overall capacity. And a lot of this is not necessarily to do specifically with technology and security design, but some good old management capabilities. So it's really putting these in place to support the overall processes. Here's a time chart of the capacity and demand. The black line here is the capacity available to deal with security solutions, and these bars here is the overall demand required. Now the yellow demand here is really just highlighting that these are initiatives or ideas, but not necessarily being defined to a point where we have a fixed delivery time. But if the capacity were available, we could start siphoning off this work and giving it to people as and when required, depending on the priority. But the simple point is that we have vastly more demand than capacity available, so we're operating in a capacity-constrained environment. Looking at it from a different perspective, I'm just taking here a very generic project life cycle chart here, and this molehill really describes the man days effort required to deliver a project. And typically you break a project into three components. One's the initiative stage, then there's a project stage, and then there's a service stage. And between these three stages, you've got two milestones. One's the business case, and then the other is the project handover. So as we start off in the initiative phase and we define the solution, more people get involved to do the assessments, to do the feasibility, and to a point where we've got sufficient information to put a business case together. All being well, the business case is approved, and then we're launching into the detailed design and the service design, and then we hand over to the training and hand over to service. Now, this is very much a stylized generic chart, and we haven't even considered things like agile project development, and we could have a big discussion about that. But the point I'm trying to make is here. Even if we use a standard approach, the projects are still subject to delay. And this is simply because of the lack of controls that are in place. So somebody will have an idea, hey Bob, what do you think about this? Do you think you can spend some time looking at it? And before you know it, it's become a big project where more resources have got allocated to it, but there's been gone through no channels for approval. Because it's a pet project of somebody, it gets done regardless, causing more pressure. The capacity hasn't been fully resourced, and you end up making a large case to say, look, we need to get this project over the line. It hasn't been scoped properly, but we'll do it anyway. And there's heroes who pull out all the stops to get it done, but inevitably it gets done late, and half the work that needs to be done for a proper structured design doesn't get done, and you have a lot of teething problems which the service desk have to then handle. From the InfoSec perspective, what we really want to do is actually move away from that scenario where everything's done at the last minute or on a hero basis, but done in a much more coordinated way up at the start of the project. And this is a key illustration of where we're moving away from a computer says no type approach, where we're just protecting the organization and making sure there's no security breaches, but much more through to an enabled approach where the business can still put in new solutions, but with the security protocols tied down and the resource sufficiently built in to make sure that the project gets delivered. So the key point here is that we're able to identify which projects get done based on the business case, and if we've allocated sufficient funding for the security design, for example, in the project up front. However, in order to do this, we've still got a lot of projects that are still ongoing, so we do need the extra capacity for those new projects coming to be sufficiently resourced and attended to come up with the right solution. Now, how do we identify the right solution? Now, in the client's organization, they have what's called a high-level assessment document. Other people call it a project charter, other people call it an ideas document, but the idea is it's noted down on a piece of paper to say what it is. The proposal is that at the initiative stage, the security architects would be able to take this idea, propose a few ideas on how the security could be reinforced for that idea to go ahead, and then make an estimate on the amount of effort that InfoSec would need to contribute to that project to make sure that it could be delivered with the right security protocols given the level of risk which is appropriate. Now, the key benefit of doing it this way is that it's the project funding that will continue to fund the security design throughout the life cycle of the project, meaning that the capacity for architects is already allocated to the project. And this is based on the high-level assessments. The other key benefit is that at the end of the day, given the cost, the extra cost of providing sufficient security protocols around the project is, well, does the business outcome justify the extra cost? And we can make a more informed choice on whether to go ahead or not with that project. Now, looking further afield in terms of the operational management of demand, effectively we have four key types of demand. Now, the standard thing is to record the request in what we call a register. It's literally a list of the new requests coming in, and categorize it. Is it a change request? If so, then it goes through a standard change request process, and it's already there. We've got help desk support, and that's a typical example of opening up a firewall. Is it a standard service? So we could put a new training program together, or do an induction for new starters, or it's doing a firewall test, or getting an external audit of the security defenses. That is a standard service which we can call off, and we may not know exactly the right number of days, but we can at least put together a ballpark figure based on past experience, and that forms part of the catalogue. Now, obviously, projects are a much more unknown quantity, and if so, then the process we would then follow is going through the standard project planning, which I've effectively outlined in the previous few slides. And last but not least, is it something else? It may just be an idea. So we can still have a coffee, we can still do a high-level assessment, we can look at the main risk attributes of the proposal, and at least say, well, we've got some options here. Is it something that can be canned, or is it something that's got legs and we can move forward with it? And on the back of this, we can take a much more holistic view and say, well, are there any risks looking at the overall list of requests going on that we need to consider? So it may well be that the business comes in with a really high urgent request, but actually in terms of risk profile it's really low. However, there's something there on the list which does need looking at and needs to be put to bed quite quickly. So it's getting that assessment done for the appropriate requests. Now, looking at the InfoSec roles, I'm focusing here specifically on the security architect, and basically want to call out the fact that these people are the experts in threats and opportunities and security infrastructure. So distinct from the the engagement manager, who was more focused on the training and the enforcement of policies, this person is much more focused up at the front of demand in the initiative stage of projects to assess the options. So obviously the skills are going to reflect that in terms of architecture, design, security knowledge, but still the requirement to have strong communication skills and a proactive, open-minded approach to solutions is going to be prerequisite. And the target audience here is going to be more aimed at the key influencers. So in summary, in terms of InfoSec enablement, there's three core aspects. The first one is moving from a protect to an enable and protect. The second one is moving from awareness to engagement. And then finally, moving from a technology focus to a risk focus. So if you're a business relationship manager and you're thinking, okay, well, this is all very well and good for information security, what does this mean for business relationship managers? So if you recall, I at the beginning looked at the house of BRM, so to speak, and really wanted to focus on three key things. One was defining clarity for the BRM role, improving demand shaping, and then improving service discipline. So what I'm now going to do is show you how the activities we did for information security correlated to these three aspects here. I'd first like to talk about capabilities and competencies because this has a very strong bearing on the overall project approach and how we elicit the types of skills and role structures that we put in place for the engagement manager and the security architect. The provider capability is effectively a description of tools, processes, roles and responsibilities together. So if you were to ask, well, what does a infosec a function do, you'll be able to say, well, they do security assessments, they have these people with this profile of roles and skills, and they use these tools to deploy it. So that's the capability. However, the competencies relate specifically to the person. Now, in this specific instance, we also need to look at the skills and aptitude of the person in order to fulfill the role. Now, hence the job descriptions and hence the focus on the principles in terms of the strategic alignment. So this really provides the basic framework on which we built additional views and perspectives of how the roles and activities were going to be deployed in the organization. Again, from a capability perspective, there's two things going on here. So the capabilities I outlined earlier in the information security department had security control, demand management, communication, so on and so forth. But there's another context within which you have maturity levels. So you're going from level 1 all the way up to level 5. Now, this bears a very strong resemblance to CMMI. And what I've done here is really describe in a bit more detail, not just the process element, which is what CMMI does, but added people and tools to that, just to say, well, what should we expect to see at level 1 and at level 5? The point is to say, well, if we can identify with the current status, it's then a question of, well, we know we're here, but we want to get over here, and if we can paint the future operating model of how we want to be, then we can understand the amount of change required to make it happen. So what do we mean by defining clarity of the BRM role? Well, the clarity for me is understanding the organizational context within which the provider works, and this is identified by looking at the organizational chart, or in this case a somewhat abstracted version of it. It means defining the provider strategy, and you saw that earlier with to provide to enable and protect the company. It means understanding the provider operator model and how the business relationship management roles fit into the operating model. And it means also clarifying the BRM role from this job specification. So if we have all of these elements in place, we have clarity on what a business relationship manager should do. Now, I'm starting to use the word business relationship manager, but in essence, the roles that we've been talking around in InfoSec has been the engagement manager and security architect. Now, they do have business relationship management roles, but they've been clearly articulated within the InfoSec environment. So let's have a look now at demand shaping. So a statement from the BRMI, the Business Relationship Management Institute. Demand shaping is a discipline that stimulates, surfaces and shapes business demand for provider services, capabilities and products. And it's here in the first pillar of the House of BRM. Now, from the InfoSec perspective, you may well remember this funnel approach here where we said, well, demand's coming from 5 different places. Okay, that's fine. So we understand where it's coming from. I think the key point here is to say, well, from an InfoSec perspective, the security architect is going to have a key influence in the enable phase of the project. Now, continuing with the statement from BRMI, it ensures that business strategies fully leverage provider capabilities and that the provider service portfolio and capabilities enable business strategies. That's only going to be done at the enable phase or the initiative phase of the project. So again, the mandate to have the correct resource at that point in time fulfills that. Another statement from BRMI, demand shaping is focused on optimizing the business value realized through provider services, capabilities and products. That low value demand is suppressed while higher value demand is stimulated. So you remember our little chart about understanding the risk profile of projects and the context within which the business operates, trying to get a balance between compliance, security breaches, legal requirements, and also competitive advantage. Well, it's risk, the vocabulary of risk, the process of governance and business engagement to get the right balance. In so doing, we'll get rid of the projects which don't add as much value once risk and security is taken into account, but we'll identify those projects which have a lower risk profile and then are further promoted as a consequence. Looking at the service discipline. So what is servicing? So the BRMI states that the servicing discipline coordinates resources, manages business partner expectations, and integrates activities in accordance with the business partner-provider partnership. It ensures that the business partner-provider engagement translates demand into effective supply requirements. So where's this been articulated in the terms of information security? Well, we integrate activities, so as I pointed out, it's not just a one-way communication flow, it's now a circular flow with feedback from the business community. It coordinates resources, and as you saw here, the idea that we have a point of focus for collating demand, whatever shape they may be in, and then there's now activities at this level to translate those demands into supply requirements. And in a sense, we're also managing business partner expectations. So you remember the principles from the strategy on the page, how we deal with business partners, and then also the actual communication and engagement activities for engagements and awareness in InfoSec. So in getting to the point where we were able to clearly define the servicing, the demand harvesting and the clarity of the role, what steps did we take? Well, we took 3 steps. The first one was strategic analysis, the second was functional analysis, and then finally we defined and deployed the roles to achieve the outcomes. So the points here are that it was front and center on strategy and business value. We didn't go into technology solutions nor the individual operational issues. We weren't sidetracked. The subsequent outcomes driven to key issues, focus areas or problem statements. So it was looking at the strategy that defined the problem statement. Once we had a problem statement, we were then able to conduct the functional analysis to answer what competences and capabilities are required to resolve the problem. And then it was looking at the maturity of those different capabilities and saying, well, where are we now and what future level of competence do we require? Having that in place, it was easy then to create a plan, looking at the competencies and responsibilities that existed in the organization, identifying the gaps, documenting the roles, the processes and the training and procedures, funding, recruiting and then deploying the roles, and then in the final stage, training and coaching. So overall, what are the observations coming away from this? Well, basically, the client came to Baxter Thompson Associates having clearly identified the problem to solve. In many cases, the problem may well be hidden by various issues. The strategy may not be so clear. In this case, we already had a working platform to move from. What that meant in practice was that we didn't buy something off a shelf. We didn't just buy a book and said, read that, then go and do it. Very much the application of BRM principles was customizing specifically to the contextual environment, in this case information security. So there was a lot of work and effort put into making it specific to InfoSec. That's not to say in applying business relationship management, those principles were reduced. In fact, they were reinforced. But the point is, one man's business relationship manager could be another man's security architect or another man's engagement manager. Only some of the disciplines and competencies were focused on. So effectively, the role of business relationship management was split between two people. Finally, this starts the journey. We've been able to stabilize some of the operational issues and some of the project management issues. But the point is, having now a clear strategic mandate, a communications approach, we can further move up the maturity curve. So, in summary, the application of BRM to provider functions needs to take into account these four things. We need to have a framework, cross-referencing the problem statement to potential solutions. We need to have significant understanding of the organizational context, and we need to make sure that we tailor the solutions and help the client own the solution. Secondly, we need to address the business needs and concerns so that we add the most value at the given point in the client journey. We need to demonstrate the flexibility of the BRM role in any context, but that may well require significant tailoring to make it work. For me, the benefits of having a business relationship management approach means that you do get that strategic alignment. You start to focus on the right priorities, and in this particular case, it was reducing risk. And then finally, it was increasing collaboration across the company, and then that maximizes the value. Having said that, for a strategic BRM role to be fully effective, there needs to be stability and competence in the core capabilities of the provider function. So if we're talking about service, if we're talking about projects, the delivery of those needs to be stable. So those are the key comments I wanted to make. Thank you very much for listening. I'm now happy to take your questions.